What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo Fantasy channel, talking some NFL draft prospects ahead of the 2022 NFL draft. And we are here today talking Georgia receiver George Pickens. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We are also brought to you today by Underdog Fantasy. They have best ball drafts, live drafts, pick'em contests where you can win up to 20x your entry fee. Use the promo code Awesemo, and you are going to get a match deposit bonus up to $100. So make sure to check out Underdog Fantasy today. Diving into today's prospect, George Pickens, wide receiver coming out of Georgia, widely viewed as a future first rounder when he was in school as a freshman, but injuries have been a significant concern for him down the stretch. Starting with his size profile, this is a guy that did check in with good size. He's 6'3", only 195 pounds, and he did run a 4.47 40-yard dash. Now, George Pickens, he suffered a torn ACL in the 2021 spring game, and that limited him to just a few snaps this past year. He was able to work his way back for Georgia's title run, but he just did not play a focal point in the offense, and most of his junior season was spent rehabbing, not producing on a football field, not training for the 40-yard dash, not putting weight on his frame in the weight room. So questions, what would George Pickens look like had he not been injured throughout this past year with a torn ACL, which is a year-long rehab? Now, he does have pretty good size. The weight is a little bit of an issue, but the athleticism is still there for Pickens, and he's still a very young prospect. He's 21 years old, so there is a little bit of ability here for teams to put meat on his frame, put weight on his frame. When we look at Pickens, as a recruit, he was a 5-star. He was the number 4 receiver in the 2019 class. He's from Alabama, and then he put up his best numbers as a true freshman in the SEC against some of the best competition. He had 49 receptions that year, 727 yards, and 8 scores. That was a 19.6% target share, and he did it largely on the boundary. It was just 11% in the slot for Pickens. That is very, very impressive here, playing for Kirby Smart, and he's a player that broke out later in the year. We see some of the receptions, the yards, a lot of that came towards the end of the season. He was in more of a timeshare to begin the year, but there are some pretty solid numbers to look at, even in just the box score. This is a guy that put up 4 receptions for 54 yards in 2019 against LSU, the team that won the national title, and that was Derek Stingley's best year. In the bowl game, he put up 12 receptions for 175 yards against Baylor, and he's producing against other opponents as well. Texas A&M, South Carolina, over 50 yards in both of those games. Overall, Pickens has shown the ability to produce. It just hasn't happened for a while. When we look at 2019, he did play a decent amount, 36 receptions, 513 yards, but he missed 2 games entirely due to a shoulder injury and portions of other due to injury as well. So even his sophomore season was not a complete showing for George Pickens. And then we know what happened this past year, only 5 catches because of the torn ACL. Now, George Pickens is not a special teamer. He's never done that. But even as a freshman, his yards per route run was pretty solid, which is an efficiency metric we'd like to look at for receivers. 2.64 yards per route run as a true freshman. For your reference, that's not towards the top of this class, but it is still better than a lot of solid prospects. It's better than Chris Olave's yards per route run this year. We know what the concern with Pickens is going to be. It's going to be the injuries. Now, I have a couple other concerns. Size is still an issue for me. I'll bring you back to that page when we look at some of the comparables for Pickens. He's very slight for his frame. So when you look at players that compare closely to him, you're getting a lot of tall, slight receivers. It's Tajay Sharp. It's Josh Reynolds, Cedric Wilson, Jerome Simpson, if we want to go back a little bit, Sidney Rice, if we want to go back a little bit. There's a lot of production in this category, but there's very little elite upper echelon production. And again, there are some questions here. Can Pickens put on more weight? Can he potentially get faster? Again, this is a guy that's missed the last 2 years with injuries. So it's a little bit of an unknown. It's a little bit of a projection. And that is why Pickens still probably gets drafted on day 2 in this draft. Teams that could look at Pickens are probably looking at a boundary X-type receiver, maybe a Z, depending on where they see his fit. Again, he's a player that only played in the slot 11% of the time. So what kind of teams could use an athletic boundary X-style receiver? I think you look at a team like the Washington Commanders. They could use a lot of help. They don't quite have the draft capital for it, but potentially later in the draft, they're a team that could potentially look to replace some of the players that they've lost in the past. I think a team like the Cowboys, who's been linked to a lot of different players following the losses of Cedric Wilson and Amari Cooper, could look at a receiver on the boundary there as well. And then potentially some just teams that might miss out on the elite receivers in round one, but need receivers, the Packers, the Chiefs. They've all lost a lot of production this year, and they're not exactly high enough in this draft to get some of the elite prospects unless one were to fall. So I think on day two, Pickens could be a nice option for those two teams who've lost a ton of production, Packers and Devontae Adams, Chiefs and Tyreek Hill. Let me know where you think George Pickens comes off the board and where he might land. Really interesting prospect to talk about in this class, and I'm excited to see where he goes. My name is Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next time.